Hello YouTube, I'm Toby. Now, a while ago I bought what can best be described as a mystery PC, and today we'll be taking a look at the capabilities of this computer. Now, by the title of this video you may be able to guess what's in this computer, but it's an Intel Pentium 4 clocked at 3 GHz. It's just one core and 2 threads, and that's pretty much what I want to figure out if that is still useful today. Now, furthermore, we have 2 GB of DDR2 RAM. We've got a GTX 550 Ti that I installed just to make sure that if we encountered any bottlenecks, it would be a CPU bottleneck. Now, all the games we'll be testing will be running off of a 60 GB 7200 RPM hard disk drive. It's not much, but it's what I had laying around to spare. Also, the power supply is was a Thermaltake 480 watt power supply, and the operating system is Windows 10. Now, the actual benchmarks I ran differ from the ones I wanted to run. And the ones I ran was Resident Evil 6 benchmarking tool, Counter-Strike Source, Cinebench R15, OpenGL, Left 4 Dead, and Half-Life 2 Lost Coast. I also wanted to try a Global Offensive and Fortnite and Subnautica, but for reasons you'll get to know, this never happened. Let's jump into the first benchmark, Cinebench R15. Now, as you can probably tell, it says it's a one-core processor with 2 threads, and while I believe this is true, it kind of acts like a dual core, but it's just a single core with 2 threads. And we ended with a score of just 40 Cinebench points, which is well, to say the least, not much. Now, keep in mind though that during all of these tests, Windows was doing its basics operations in the background, and this, when you're running on a single core processor, this is pretty much what you can run. Moving on to the OpenGL test, we ended with a score of 15.93 frames per second, so really just not anything to be proud of, to be honest. Now, next up, I decided to run the Resident Evil 6 benchmarking tool. I ran it on low settings, and it ran pretty bad, and we ended with a score of 1,396 points, which is way below the norm for the GTX 550 Ti. With a quad-core Athlon got close to 4,000, so it's pretty obvious that we're dealing with a CPU bottleneck in this situation. Now, next up, I decided to run Counter-Strike Source. I set the settings to low, and I decided to run the integrated video card benchmark first, and we ended with a score of 45.21 frames per second. Now, in the beginning I thought this might be enough to run the actual game, but I did decide to run, actually try out the game, and it was stuttering like crazy, and it was honestly very unplayable. After the benchmark, I did not realize it would be this unplayable, but to my surprise it actually was, and I have to admit I am really disappointed about what this processor can do. Next up, I decided to try Left 4 Dead. It's a fairly old title, but I decided to run it at low and medium settings. And we actually ended up running at somewhere between 20 and 30 frames per second, depending on what was going on in the scene. And it was sort of playable, but not something I'd recommend. It's already starting to look very bad for this processor. The final benchmark I decided to run was Half-Life 2 Lost Coast, because it also has an integrated benchmarking tool. And I set the settings to low, and in the beginning it was stuttering a lot, but it kind of smoothed out as the benchmark went along, and we ended with a score of 41.5 frames per second, which on the surface doesn't look too bad, but when you take a look at what the benchmark was in the beginning, it was actually horrific, to be honest. Now, like I said, I also wanted to run Counter-Strike Global Offensive, but after looking at the Counter-Strike Source results, I kind of just figured out that yeah, that's not going to happen. The same pretty much goes for Subnautica. I know, again, from the Counter-Strike Source benchmark that this is not going to happen. Also, the same story with Fortnite. I honestly, just like the others, decided not to run Fortnite because I just know that, again, seen from the previous benchmarks, this computer is in no way capable of running it. Alright, so it's conclusion time, and well, my conclusion is, if you have a computer with a Pentium 4, 1-core processor and 2 gigabytes of DDR2, it's definitely time to upgrade, because you're not going to play anything close to remotely modern on this system. I mean, the games I played were fairly old, and also Global Offensive is old, and I highly doubt this system can play it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, just feel free to ask.